Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Andor is the show that throws away all of the most exciting parts of Star Wars and then just focuses on the mundane. It's like my old mentor used to tell me when I was trying to learn how to use a camera, Alan, don't focus on filming cool and epic things. Try to film very mundane things in a very cool and epic manner. And then so when you finally do film something really cool, you could blow the audience away. And that is Andor in a nutshell. I mean, heck, I was able to do a serious video about the Bureau of Standards yesterday, and a lot of people watched it. Because we all know everything has a purpose, a meaning. It's not just some dude splashing paint on a canvas without intention. Instead, every frame is filled with intent, and it is absolutely beautiful to watch. Star Wars has always been one of the most heavily analyzed franchises in cinematic history, and now we have something once again that we can really do a deep dive into. And since we've covered the Bureau of Standards, let's take a look at another very important piece of the Imperial system, the prisons. And to truly understand the Imperial prison system, we're not going to be taking a look at the legal code or enforcement. We're going to be taking a look at the economics, because that's something you can't really lie about. Follow the money and you'll find all of the truth behind the policies. So what is Emperor Palpatine's #1 priority? It's establishing his military-first dictatorship. It's one of the dumbest political and economic systems you could possibly create. It should only be considered if you're literally being invaded by gigantic alien bugs. There's a reason why only North Korea in our modern age has this type of government and political system. And they technically are still at war with the South. What's the Empire's excuse? They're just at war with themselves. A military-first policy that can prevent land and resources and lives being lost by protecting your citizens is a good idea. But if you're waging war against your own people, it's just a huge drain on the entire system. Now, Palpatine faces a lot of problems, the biggest one being that the galaxy is too large. The military that Palpatine wants to build is extremely ambitious, half a dozen Star Destroyers for every star sector, and tens of thousands of Imperial Army troopers and stormtroopers to put boots on the ground. Even with the riches the Empire has managed to amass and also print, this is completely unfeasible and impossible to do. There are just way too many sectors and star systems. But Palpatine does it anyway. He expands the military-industrial complex to a crazy size. He nationalizes several military-industrial companies, entire worlds of raw resources, and brings it all underneath his control. He gets rid of worker rights, regulations, and anything that stands in the way of productivity, and essentially pays a bunch of industrialists to be slave drivers and squeeze the maximum amount of productivity out of their workforce to create, TIE fighters, which are brilliantly designed for mass production, by the way. Palpatine also controlled the banks. This was one of the last things he did during the Republic era. This way he could control interest rates and how much money he could print for his projects. I mean, it was really ambitious to transition the Republic's relatively free market economy that was diverse and spread across the galaxy into a massive, centrally controlled military-industrial state that focused on building Star Destroyers and walkers. This is not something that can happen overnight, and it costs a lot of money to subsidize these type of projects, and one basically needs complete total control over their economic and political system, which Palpatine had. And honestly, after seeing what he did to Illum, talk about desecrating holy places, I imagine he would have had enough kyber crystals after, making the Death Star's main weapon to build a bunch of these awesome looking lightsabers from our sponsor, OwnASaber.com. These are known as the Wrathbearer. It's sleek, black, and glossy, and has this finish with the silver rings. If the Empire ever brings back Force-sensitive clones or stormtroopers, I could see them wielding these. It's functional, and it's a practical design great for mass production. It also comes in 2 other colors. You can get it for gold if you're looking for that Eternal Empire vibe, or silver if you just want to be a gray Jedi who wants to be left alone. And it's decently priced at $129.99 for the hilt and a RGB dueling blade that's durable and good for sparring. Or for $177.99, you could get the hilt and a pixel blade, which means it has LED strips running down the entire blade and allows you to do all sorts of really cool things. And for a limited time, you can use our promo code P.O.R.D, that's all caps P-O-R-G, for 20% off at checkout. Check out the description down below for more information. And as usual, guys, thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Now, Palpatine could have fixed all of his problems by creating large automated factories and staffing those factories with a large droid workforce. But for a variety of different reasons, a lot of it leading back to the Clone Wars and the galaxy's general fear and distaste for droids.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
Your droids. They'll have to wait outside. We don't want them here.
Mine's way out by the speeder. We don't want any trouble.
We don't actually see many automated systems as a result, which is ironic because Palpatine created this fear by artificially starting the Clone Wars in the first place. I mean, talk about karma, right? I mean, all Palpatine really needs to do is have a bunch of droids, create some machines. Those machines can create more droids. Those droids can create more machines, and those machines can create droid soldiers, and boom, problem solved. I mean, that is just something that will cascade completely out of control until you do actually have droids in every sector of space. Although there is one problem with that plan, you need a massive amount of capital to build those initial factories in the first place. But the Empire at its core was so cheap. I mean, technically they already had one of the best fighting forces in the galaxy, the clones, but they actually got rid of them because they realized they were way too expensive. Instead, Palpatine, who I should mention is a complete psychopath, realized that the Empire's most useful resource and plentiful resource was actually its human capital, or an also non-human capital. We realized that by taking all of these citizens from the private sector and bringing them into government or military jobs, he was essentially creating jobs that would naturally breed a sense of loyalty from those who joined in, also get really cheap labor as a result. And that's right, the Empire didn't really need to be competitive with their pay, they just needed to destroy any other opportunities out there. And soon the Empire would become one of the largest employers in the entire galaxy, like Amazon. On Lothal, this is exactly what happened. The Empire literally seized farms from people, forcing them to move to the cities where they had no jobs and prospects, and they would end up living there like homeless refugees. The Empire would then open up an Imperial armory complex with the help of senior fleet systems and began hiring those displaced people to work the factory line. But of course, Palpatine wanted more and more, and so he squeezed the people in the factories more and more. And as we're seeing in the Andor show, the Empire is transitioning from a more benign form to a much more cruel form. Eventually, events like the destruction of the first Death Star and the destruction of the Moon facilities will severely strain Imperial supply line and force the Empire to squeeze the various vendors they work with to increase production. Now, many of these factories will begin with using local labor. But eventually the conditions will get so bad, the pay will get so low, the hours will get so long that you'll have open revolts, which will then get crushed by the plastoid heels of the Imperial Stormtrooper legions. And forget about unionizing. Organizations like the Cobalt Laborers Reformation Front was basically branded as a terrorist organization for trying to organize. And what started out as a bunch of angry miners turned into a full-blown resistance movement that helped the 61st Mobile Infantry overthrow the local Imperial Legion on Solist. You're not just paying dues here, guys. I mean, you gotta snap necks and bleed a little to join this union. The Emperor, as usual in autocratic systems, will have silenced or removed any reasonable people who might be advising him. Instead, he'll be surrounded with sycophants that ensure him, despite the fact that they are slowly destroying the galaxy's labor force and the rebels are slowly destroying all of their factories and fuel depots, that somehow the Imperial military-industrial complex will continue to be able to keep up the pace or even ramp up the pace of production, even though the demand for military products will also probably be rising as the war gets hotter and hotter. The reality is the Empire will become desperate for more labor, which is where we get to the scene with ISB Colonel Wulf Yularen. It's the usual type of Imperial speech full of pomp, arrogance, and bluster, but there is a very interesting piece of policy stuck in between there.
Any criminal act with even indirect effect on the Empire will henceforth be branded a Class 1 offence.
All prison sentences are immediately re-evaluated. All outstanding fines and levies are to be paid in full.
P.O.R.D, the Public Order Resentencing Directive. This actually comes from Palpatine himself. And although this seems like a really stupid overreaction, you know, like the one that Luthen Rael really wants the Empire to carry out,
Palpatine won't hesitate now.
Exactly. We need it. We need the fear. We need them to overreact.
its true purpose is not about punishing people or keeping the galaxy safe. It's not even about creating fear, as the Tarkin Doctrine always tries to do. If you really think about it, the P.O.R.D will be very ineffective at finding individual rebels. Instead, what's going to happen is a bunch of innocent Imperials are going to get incarcerated, and they won't be able to work their jobs or play their roles in society. I mean, yes, Andor was randomly picked up by a shore trooper on Naimos, but I would argue that was kind of his fate. I mean, during that entire episode, everyone was heading and running towards war while Andor was trying to run away. I mean, even his mom was picking up a blaster in one hand and a cane in the other. But that's besides the point, okay? P.O.R.D has one real purpose. The Imperial prison complex has one real purpose. and that is to incarcerate as many people as they possibly can so that the Empire could turn that human capital into free labor. It's the next step from cheap labor. If you're Palpatine and you're looking at the situation in the galaxy and actually understanding what the raid on Aldhani means, you're freaking out. You know that the Empire doesn't have enough troops to control every sector of the entire galaxy. You definitely don't have enough ships and armor and blasters either. The Death Star might put the fire of rebellion out for a short time, but ultimately you're gonna need boots on the ground to hold the ground. And not just boots, you're also gonna need walkers, starfighters, and all that other stuff. Again, this is a completely idiotic struggle that Emperor Palpatine has gotten himself into. He just does not understand this is not how you run a small little village, let alone a galaxy. As we've talked about in previous videos, he should be allowing these local authorities to take care of the local problems instead of increasing the burden of the federal government. And so to me, P.O.R.D is just a very desperate measure to draft, or I guess imprison as many people as possible, and then also lengthen any other prisoners' sentences so that they could be stuck in the system for a longer time. And if you think the Empire has a lot of Star Destroyer variants, wait till you see how many different types of Imperial detention centers they have. You had Imperial detention centers like Camp LEG-817. This is where Jyn Erso was sent. This is your basic type of labor camp where people toiled away at meaningless and very difficult jobs. Then you have Imperial prison barges, which are designed to transport people from one labor site to another. You have entire detainment moons, which are difficult to escape from. You had special prisons like the Spire, which is where Palpatine kept special individuals like Maul during the Clone Wars. You didn't really do much work there. Instead, an interrogation droid would work on you. Also, one quick way to quickly raise cash for the Empire was just to send prisoners and criminals to the spice mines of Kessel, where the Pike Syndicate was willing to pay top dollar for a good slave. Nakari Kellen, a friend of Luke Skywalker, saw her own mother get sold to the mines of Kessel after she wrote a subversive song called Vader's Many Prosthetic Parts. And working in the mines of Kessel was probably even worse than being in an Imperial labor camp. And that's because the Pike Syndicate made a cost-benefit analysis and determined that it was better to work your prisoners to death and let them slowly starve in a year or two than properly take care of them. I mean, the Empire weren't even proper human supremacists. They were literally taking innocent humans and then setting them to work in mines run by scary cobra-looking alien monsters. So what about Andor? Where is he going? Well, we actually have shots of the prison he's going to be going to from the trailers, and honestly, it reminds me of a hellish Apple store. Which means that it's relatively clean, but it's absolutely soulless and a terrible use of real estate. Like, there's a lot of empty spaces for no reason. It seems like everyone is barefoot, which is interesting. We don't know what they're working on. It could be robotic arms for an assembly line, maybe. It also looks like most of the tools are strapped to the ceiling for safety reasons, obviously, and the prisoners seem to be segregated by sex, which makes sense. Looking at these other shots from the trailer, it seems to indicate that this prison is completely underwater. If that is true, then it makes escape next to impossible. Of course, Andor is going to try because it's Andor. I also should mention that everyone's favorite tactical blueberry, Sergeant Linus Mosk, might be returning. I believe this is a shot of him right here. I'd recognize that swagger anywhere. Also, the actor who portrays him, Alex Ferns, has himself listed in several more episodes of Andor as Sergeant Kostek on IMDb. My belief is that Linus Mosk could not keep himself away from kicking Rebel skulls in, and so he changed his name and he made up a new identity and signed up to work in an Imperial detention facility. I mean, he's definitely not going to get a job with his actual name after that botched arrest attempt on Ferrix. He's definitely blacklisted. If that is the case, it'll be really interesting to see what happens if Cassian Andor runs into Sergeant Mosk, because Linus Mosk definitely remembers what he looks like. It also should be mentioned that Tony Gilroy said that the next 3 episodes are one arc, and then the last 2 will be like the final arc, which means that there's a possibility that all 3 episodes will take place in this prison. And so we're about to get treated to an hour-and-a-half mini movie of what life is like in an Imperial detention center. And this might be really interesting. I mean, ever since I read Death Troopers all those years back, which honestly is one of the best zombie novels I've ever read, I've been wanting to get a better look at how the penal system works. And I'm especially excited because Andor is doing this, because we all know that there are going to be a ton of really awesome world-building details that we can go over together. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. Otherwise you're going to miss out on me teaching you guys how to make a shank out of your mess kit, because that is what one does in Star Wars prison. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.